Most global ERP programs don't struggle because the technology is wrong. They struggle because ownership is missing. We talk a lot about global standards, control, consistency, efficiency. The moment those standards hit local reality, the real work begins. Sites feel imposed on, teams comply, but they don't commit. And what looks like success on a governance slide quietly turns into workarounds, resistance, and erosion over time. So the real question isn't how do we enforce global ERP standard, it's how do we create one that local teams actually believe in, adopt, and protect. That's what today's conversation is about. Moving beyond compliance, balancing global intent with local reality, and understanding what real ownership looks like in complex ERP transformations. And to explore that, I'm welcoming back someone who works exactly at that intersection of global ambition and operational truth. Arne Buthmann and Oxygy, welcome back to the ERP Perspective. Good afternoon, Arne. Welcome back to the ERP Perspective.
Thank you. Great to see you again, George. Glad to be back.
Yeah, I was just saying in the pre-recording that it's fantastic to have Oxygy back on the show. I know we did our other recording around late October, November time last year, but it'd be great to hear what you've been up to over the last 4 months and what Oxygy have been working on.
No, thanks. And again, it's fantastic to be back on the show and to be with you. Indeed, lots has happened, ongoing clients engagement, but also see where new or other companies start with their ERP programs. And so it's exciting to see ongoing projects progress and always come with challenges, but that's, where we are to help them. And I think the topic that we have today around, the driving the local ownership for these global standards, that's really what we see and hear a lot as a challenge. And I think where it would be fun to talk about, like, how can companies address this?
Definitely. I know we were talking around potential topics, what we're seeing in the market, that would be a stimulating conversation for the ERP community. I know we've titled this episode "Driving Local Ownership for Global ERP Standard" and why it matters. I mean that's a fantastic topic. I mean it links nicely to what you guys bring to the community and the services that you provide. Why did you think this topic was so relevant at the moment and was a good topic to discuss?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think for me, it addresses one of the key, almost like psychological challenges of every ERP program, which is that, of course, companies want to drive more global standardization and harmonization. At the same time, no one, and we can all talk about it individually, doesn't really likes standards. We are all special. We all want to be seen in, what makes us unique. And because we all don't like standards, we even more don't like standards that are imposed on us. And so this almost like psychological dilemma of how do you still create ownership in myself, or if we go back to an organization, ownership within a local entity for something that comes from global as a global standard. That's for me one of the key puzzle pieces that we have to solve in every ERP transformation.
I think it's one thing understanding the standards or reading about it or telling you, but another aspect is actually adopting it. It's all good knowing the solution, but it's one thing knowing the solution and actually adopting it. In terms of adopting that, and especially in a sustainable way of working, because someone could adopt that standard of working and it would be great for 90 days.
Yes, exactly.
And then they slip out of that. Why are you seeing that in the market at the moment? Are you seeing that with your customers, or how are people moving to that new standard and keeping it?
Yeah, I think that's let's go deeper on this. I think if we take a step back, it often already starts with the fact that even like someone in a local entity in England or in South Africa may not necessarily even understand why these global standards are needed, right? So, and I think it probably starts with really helping communicate the why behind the global harmonization and the standardization. And to me, what we see is that a lot of the global harmonization and standardization is really pushed because honestly, like, if you don't have a global ERP standard, not only, and you really customize your global ERP standard to every single entity, not only does that become quite complex and costly, it actually also really results in then having or continuing to have a collection of local companies, but not one enterprise, right? So I think if you can articulate as a firm why you want to have a global standard in terms of a shared language for data, for processes, for roles, responsibilities, ways of working, and then with this shared language, really create better transparency also across different entities, different markets, different manufacturing sites, then you actually build a much better basis for consistency. With this consistency comes fewer variants, fewer handoffs, less confusion often, and with that maybe even also fewer frictions, because today most multinationals still work across markets, work across function, and so if you can actually work according to the same standard, that does reduce the friction, but that also really allows for scaling up your company. It makes it much easier to grow through M&A, to enter new markets, because you don't constantly have to reinvent everything. So really this idea initially to express how this global standard turns many local companies into one enterprise is for me the starting point, because it's not necessarily always a benefit for a local entity to follow a global standard. But it is a big benefit for a company to work across, a global company to work across one standard. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, 100%. I mean, there's so many benefits of doing it, and it's
Yeah.
kind of seen as a control mechanism in a way. And
Yeah.
the transparency. I mean, would you see it as a control mechanism, or what would you see it as the impact to the business?
I think of course, there's an element in terms of control. If control means having a harmonized data, having same KPIs, same ways of working, that gives you much better insights into how your business is performing overall, but also when you then double click to really see like where the business maybe is weaker in one area or in the other. So in that sense, it has a bit of a control from a global perspective, but I see so much benefit also from even a local entity perspective to know that we work the same way. Like people today move from Denmark to Germany, from England to Australia, and if every time you work with the same company, you have to again get your head around, but how do you do purchase orders here? How do you close an account there? That's a waste of time in terms of productivity. So really there is a big benefit for global firms to have that standard. I think the challenge is that very often these global standards are designed far away from the real work. And I think that's, for me, the complicating factor of what companies do wrong, which is that they think they know how an entity works, and then they just, design the global standard. But we all know that, every entity has a different starting point, they have a different maturity, they have different ways of working, they have different market pressures. And so if global assumes that they know how a manufacturing site in Poland works or finance works in Argentina, then there's a problem, because then when you then come with a global standard, people rightfully feel that this is done to them instead of with them. And when people, on the other hand, see themselves in the design, that's when you have a real opportunity to create ownership, because otherwise they always disengage quietly, and then with this disengagement, they create again their local workarounds around the standard. They keep on solving the old problems the old way, and you have these shadow processes creeping up. You get back into data issues. And in the end, everyone thinks like, yeah, but we have a global standard, but it still all feels super fragmented. And that's when leaders again rightfully ask, like, yeah, so where's the value now that comes out of this?
My question was going to be, why do global standards often struggle once they hit the
Exactly
reality of local operations? And do you think it is just a communication piece, or people making these decisions of a global standard that maybe aren't at that site, they're not at that business unit, they don't understand the processes they're currently working with and what actually needs to be adopted?
I think it's a lot about that, right? So because the way to think about it is that when you come globally and you ask an entity to basically comply to the new global standard, that's very different from creating the ownership for a global standard, right? So because compliance to me means that people follow the rules when someone is watching them. Ownership means that people believe in the standard and the new ways of working, even when no one checks. You can, as a global firm, you can communicate, but then the question is like, do you really engage a local entity in discovering the standard, or do you just fall back on mandating compliance? But then, yeah, that works for a short time, and maybe it still looks successful at go live. But over time, people, start getting disconnected. They don't feel supported, and that's, ultimately the cost of that shows up, like because you have a lot of rework, you have longer hypercare, you create this change fatigue. The opposite is really when you create ownership, starting with clear communication, but then really enabling, each entity to discover the standard and also discover what it means to them.
Yeah, I mean, I know, many organizations confuse compliance with
Totally.
success. You mentioned obviously it can get you to go live, and you went into some of the sort of costs that it can create over time. Do you think it's not a good structure to have over a long period of time, because you might go live, but then as soon as that happens, the standard drops.
Yes.
Projects feel that pain.
Correct. No, for sure. And that's why I think that's where you notice, like, have we deployed a global standard more through compliance or through really creating ownership? Again, for me, compliance lasts until no one is watching, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's when, global program is leaving after hypercare, and then people go back to the old ways of working. Ownership is really when people start defending the standard and say, like, no, this is how we are doing it here, right? And they really feel like it's theirs, and they actually start improving it, and that's when ownership really lasts, when it actually matters.
Transformation leaders, managing teams and things like that, they probably feel this tension more,
Yes. Mhm.
this responsibility of keeping that global standard, keeping their team within that standard. I mean, how do organizations maintain, that global consistency while still respecting the genuine local
Yeah.
needs,
Yeah.
constraints, and also the expertise that local unit has?
Yeah, no, I guess that's really the key design question of every ERP implementation or transformation. The way I like to answer it is to say, like, it's not, the challenge isn't so much is it like global or is it local. It's really what, to your point, like, what is the right balance, right? And
Mhm.
um, I always say, like, not everything that your business is doing is really unique. Right, if you're honest, is really differentiating how you post an invoice, how you create a purchase order. Not sure if there is really a company X way of having to do it that way. So I think there's definitely a lot of non-differentiating work, and that's when, that's where the standard can cover that, right? Then there are legitimate exceptions, right? There's for once always these questions around, like, what are some tax, legal, regulatory compliance requirements? And of course, these local requirements have to be considered. But the other question is also always, what gives your business locally an edge? What makes you successful in your market? And again, it's not how you create a purchase order, or it's not how you post an invoice, but there are certain ways of working that you do that make you successful. And that's absolutely right to have a discussion around that when it comes to where also a global standard has to be localized. But it's really around those ways of working, roles, responsibilities, sometimes organizational aspects that you do want to have the discussion about
Yeah.
standard versus localization. But the broad answer is for me always that the 80-90%, you want to adapt the blueprint to the terrain of a local entity, and don't adapt the terrain to the blueprint, right? So that's the risk.
As you mentioned, I think a lot of it is around communication, finding out what is actually unique to the business and what normal business processes they do follow, and what can be put on sort of a global standard.
So not giving it to them as a finished product, eat or die, but really as a way to invite every local entity and say, okay, this is what we've designed globally. Honestly, you should always be able to say, and we've also designed that with input from some other entities, right? It's not just invented in an ivory tower. It really was designed with some of your colleagues from maybe even from your country, but surely from other countries. So we know it's fit for purpose for entities, and then really help teams to first understand how the standard works end to end, and then shift the conversation based on that and say, oh, now that we understand what the global standard is and why it is designed that way, what do we need to change locally to make the standard work for us? How do we have to adjust the RACI? How do we adjust roles, responsibilities, ways of working? Sometimes how do we adjust some organizational structure in order to fit with the global standard? And that should be the biggest part of the discussion. The smaller part is, as I said before, okay, where do we have, regulatory requirements that we have to consider? Where are some of the things that make us unique and successful in our market that we have to consider? But the majority is really around like, what do we need to change locally to work this way? And when you invite people and you give them space and time to think about it and to ask questions and to be critical and to also give feedback and maybe even challenge, that's when people start getting the head around the global standard. And with getting the head around, they start, adopting. And nothing is more detrimental than, of course, complying to a global standard, but also to try to rush it. I think that's when people feel it, that you're rushing them to make a decision. And so you just increase the resistance against it. And part of that is, of course, also documenting then every decisions very transparently, because you do want to be clear that all the trade-offs that an entity made are also, transparently documented. So I would say it's a really good practices to not try to bend to the standard, but actually to help people grow into the global standard.
Yeah, 100%. I think, as you mentioned it, as you were speaking, I was thinking about the challenges people face, and quite a lot of the time it is from rushing, and it's like,
Yes,
right, we need to get to this global standard,
I know.
and this is changing, and when people don't feel heard or they don't share their opinions or what they've seen,
Yes,
it's going to create friction. It's going to create problems because people don't understand why that change
yeah,
is happening, why there's going to be a benefit. So as you mentioned, it's communication, it's transparency, it's
yes,
doing it in the right way. And I know Oxygy focuses heavily on involvement,
yeah.
leadership, behavioral change. I mean, in sort of practical steps, I mean, how would you help local leaders and teams from being impacted by ERP to genuinely owning it?
Yeah. And I think super good follow-on question to the previous one, which is basically, firstly, start long before go live, but also do understand what it means for them to in terms of changes that they have to do to ways of working, roles, responsibilities, their organization. And we typically very early on really work in these what we call like the blueprint discovery sessions. So that's really where we work with in-tech teams, whether it's a supply planning team or customer care team, and it's a very intimate setting where the regional or the global team really comes, presents a global standard to them, and where they then really walk through this global standard in terms of, okay, what's really different than the way that they work today? Roles, workflows, as I said, handoffs, but really make it real, make it experience for them. Because as much as there's a risk that people resist to the global standard, there's also a real risk that they think nothing is changing, and so they don't worry. And
Yeah.
then you have the opposite effect, which is that, go live comes and everyone's like, oh, I didn't actually know that this is how we're going to work now. So, and I think you have to, that's why this early discovery is so critical, so that people do understand that changes are coming. Also understand that certain things don't change. It's always good comfort, but really helping them see this standard in action. And with that, really move from concern to understanding, and then ultimately to a decision to really follow this. So the other aspect is implicit, is really helping people very clearly translate into what is changing for each single role, what's changing for me. And that's where local leaders play a decisive role, as you said, George, right? Because especially the middle managers, where people always go to first when they have a concern or a question, they are super critical. They need like super clear guardrails, like what is happening, what's not happening. They need to be equipped to have sent the same messages, have the same talking points. But they also need to discover the standards themselves first and go through this process, because they also you want them to speak with confidence to their teams. So, and we've seen it again and again, like when managers model these new ways of working first, and it starts from the top leadership, and then of course the cat stays down, then you see much faster adoption. But when they don't, then you also see the teams hesitate, and even if the system works, they still work differently. So I would say transparency matters a lot, really making sure that people need to know which decisions are global, which decisions are local, and why. Because even if they get a no on a request to make change, if it is done in a transparent way, as you said, there's actually the reasoning behind it. There's much more acceptance of this. So the beauty, I think, in all this is also, again, from a local adaptation perspective, is once an entity starts embarking on this journey and they really adopt the global standard, then they own it, and then they start making improvements to it. And with these improvements, you have an immediate benefit again for all other entities, because you also have to understand that global standards are not frozen, right? They still evolve over time, but then they can really evolve as a whole company, and every entity benefits from the joint evolution of the others, and that keeps them alive. So in essence, I would say you do want to be sure that people get their fingerprint on the solution, because people don't own what they are just informed about. They really own what they can help shape.
100%. I mean, you mentioned you don't want that message to come from an ivory tower for someone that's
Yes,
not
exactly.
involved with the people, and the
Yeah.
amount of job responsibilities that could change, or the processes, how individuals do their role within that organization could change when they move to this new global standard. And
Yeah.
I think the message and that standard comes from above. It
Yes,
trickles down
correct.
senior leadership to the board, to everybody coming down to managing that team.
Yeah.
I mean, is there any other advice that you would give, maybe obviously the senior leadership team, but also people receiving that information from their managers, from their leadership team?
Yeah, I would say the key advice for me is it may be initially a communication task, because you have to explain why, as a company, we are now harmonizing across entities and how we bring more standardization, harmonization, unification into the firm. But then really this task of adopting or creating ownership for a global standard is primary leadership responsibility, right? And that needs this idea that I have to involve the local teams, not to redesign everything, but really to understand the standard, understand the reasons for why we created it, but also give people again and again the clarity around why also local excellence still matters. We're not trying to make everything the same. We're just trying to make a strong floor, because then there's no ceiling for actually local excellence. So investing in translating the standard into the daily work, and then continuously measuring, are people still confident, or how confident, how competent, how committed they are, so that you can adjust, is really key. But in essence, it's about this takeaway that local ownership cannot be demanded, but that you have to build it conversation by conversation. And it does take time, but it will happen eventually.
That's a great message. And I mean, for senior transformation leaders to leave them with something today to go and think about. I
Yeah.
mean, what's one message about local ownership in global ERP programs, and something that they should act on immediately if they're in this situation at the moment, or they're adopting that global standard? What is something that they should act on immediately?
Yeah, I think it's really the message around dare to be transparent and dare to be simple, right? So people appreciate honest, clear messages. They all appreciate in every single country if they feel like they're talked to like partners in this journey, and not just, if it doesn't feel like it's done to them, but it's actually done with them. So I always like to say this idea of like, if it's about me, then not without me. So if you keep that in mind as a leader, that you have to invest in this and that it does take time, then I think you're on a good track.
That's fantastic. Transparency, communication, and respect
Yes.
is sort of the main pillars. I mean, before we round up the episode, is there anything that you'd like to highlight about Oxygy, what you guys are currently working on, and maybe a sneak preview to your plan into 2026, if you can, give that away.
Yeah, no, I think all we're talking about is absolutely true for any ERP-enabled transformation, business transformation, I may say, because these are not IT projects, right? It's equally true for any other large-scale system that you're actually implementing. So I think as Oxygy, we are in the market to help business leaders that need to transform their business, often because of tech and IT enablement or digital enablement, but that really believe that we need to change the fabric of our organization, how we work, and make sure that we take the people along. Everyone always agrees that 50%, if not more, of the success comes from the people. Everyone always underinvests into the people side. So if we can raise the bar to really give equal voice to the people side, in addition to the data, the process, the system investment, that's our mission for this year and beyond. So thank you.
That's great, Arne. I mean, it's been fantastic to have you on the show. I'll link your LinkedIn below this video so people can
Thank you.
connect, reach out to you, and also more information on Oxygy. So please, guys, give them a follow. Follow Arne. He's always happy to receive messages and get involved with the community. And this has been the ERP Perspective, Oxygy, and global ERP standards. Thank you for watching.
Fantastic. Thanks for having me, George, again.
No problem. Speak soon.
Speak soon.